Okay, we're good to go. You guys are ready?
Sure. Okay.
Thanks, Travis.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'll begin by acknowledging that we're in Treaty 1 territory in the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Ron Merritt. I'll be your chairperson this afternoon. Introducing the panel members, to my right is Mr. Robert Hutchings, and across from him is Mr. Ron Stenning, and our recording secretary is Katie Sutherland, and representing the city of Winnipeg is Mr. Wong. We'll be hearing application for revision in regards to the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested has been described in each application, and will limit discussions to those matters. The statements that the applicants or the assessor make at the hearing are sworn testimony, and anybody speaking in these matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons to the assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it, along with the city administration. We make our decisions based on the evidence provided at the hearing and issue a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decision in respect to application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to Court of Queen's Bench the matter pertains to application for exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. In respect to the hearing this afternoon, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant. Following the swearing in, we will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the other applicant may have, and then it'll be the applicant's testimony, followed by questions. Each party will have the opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once evidence about the application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket this afternoon. The session will close after the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. The orders you will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible, as information of public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the public record. I'll ask our secretary to swear in Mr. Wong and to swear in Mr. Smith.
Do you affirm that the evidence you present is the truth and the nothing but the truth? Okay. Good evening.
Travis Smith.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to present is the truth and the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, we'll go according to the docket. So the first item on the docket is 100 Charles Walk. So Mr. Wong, you can take us through this property.
The subject property is 100 Charles Walk. The roll number is 140-012-60600. It's a residential apartment that's 2 to 7 stories high. It was built in 1967 and has 304 suites with 94 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $807 to get a potential income of $2,944,000. We used a 2.4% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $2,873,000. And we used a 62% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $1,091,000. Capped at 6%, we have an estimated market value of $18,188,000, which is $59,000 per unit, or about $51 per square foot. On page 4 are our rent comparables. That show that the rents we've used are supported by the market, or the indicating that it is on the low end of the market. On On the bottom of page 4 are some expense comparables showing that the expenses that we've used are supported by the market. And on the bottom of page 4, there's a sales comparable. It shows that it was a property very close to the subject property, sold for about $75 a square foot, which is a little bit higher than what we've estimated using $51 a square foot. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 6 are some cap rate sales. The following is just a sample of sales that took place during the reference period. For the purpose of showing these individual cap rates is to illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the model-derived cap rates. They are not meant to be comparable specific to the subject property. The net operating income has been developed through stabilizing the owner-reported income and expense information. Capitalization rates have been derived by dividing the property's net operating income by its sale price. So near the middle of the page are the sales for the multifamily. There's a range of about 4 to 5%, but we do have some that are in the 6% range. On page 8 is a picture of the subject property, along with its location. This property is owned by, I guess, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It's meant to provide affordable housing, so I don't believe that the financials are very useful to try to estimate a market value, because it is for the purpose of affordable housing. The way that an affordable housing property would operate would be very different from how a market value would operate. So I don't think using the financials from an affordable housing organization would be very representative of market. But it's there for you if you like. On page 13. There are some market rents from CMHC. Like we're in Zone 4. You see, Zone 4 has some rents for bachelors, 1s and 2 bedrooms, but nothing for 3 bedrooms. When you look at the Winnipeg average for a bachelor is $655, 1 bedroom is $880, and a 2 bedroom is $1,100, and a 3 bedroom is $1,300. The subject property is comprised mostly of 3 bedrooms, and we're using a rent of $800. So we are recognizing the fact that it is on the lower end of the range in terms of market. So the rents that we've used are definitely on the lower end of the range for market, and the expenses are on the high end of the range for the market, where the cap rate that we've used is supported by market. So I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $18,189,000.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Smith, questions?
Yes, just a few. Mainly to do with, pardon me, capitalization rate, I guess. If we look at your page number 5 and the City of Winnipeg columns there, the city has a a full range of cap rates from a low of 4.0 to a high of 7.3%. And the subject property is at 6. So does that is that the standard row housing capitalization rate, or how is that derived?
Based on the age and the location of the property, the model is estimated a 6% cap rate. Our range is from 4 to 7.3, with a lot of them falling between 4.9 and 5.3.
Right.
So when we use 6%, we're saying that it is probably a higher cap. It is a higher cap rate than a lot of the properties in Winnipeg.
Right. And I certainly do recognize that 6 is outside of your normal range there. The area that the subject is in, is there does the city makes specific exceptions for areas that are perhaps more challenged than others in terms of socioeconomic issues?
I believe this one is in an area where the cap rates are higher than average, so it is reflected in this particular cap rate.
In the 6%?
Yeah.
Okay.
If it was the exact same property in a different location, it might be 5.3.
So what would, I guess my question then would be, what property would generate a 7.3% capitalization rate in the city's model? What would be required for a property to be at the high end or the higher end of the range?
A very old building in a poor location or less desirable location.
So I've had some turn of the century 1911 properties that weren't in that. They were in tougher areas too, and they weren't capped at 7% or anything close to it. Is there anything else that would drive that?
Typically, smaller buildings would yield a lower cap rate. So if those properties that you were looking at were smaller, then the cap rate would be lower. And I'm conscious that we have a certain amount of time, so I'll do a few things once today, and if we can just carry those forward for the balance of the properties, I won't repeat myself. The page number 5, the capitalization rates. I'm just looking at some of the text there. It states that the City of Winnipeg's model satisfies the standards specified and set forth in the standard on ratio studies published by the International Association of Assessing Officers, the IAAO. That is the city's contention, I guess. Yes.
Okay.
It's not exactly a contention. It does meet the requested standards.
Watch, I'm not going to have the brief that I included in my file. Bear with me for just a second. So I'll just speak about it. In reading that particular document, the Standard on Ratio Studies published by the IAAO in 2013, it speaks about sale verification, and one thing that it very specifically mentions is that properties that had significant renovation post-purchase are not, and with the intent at that time of being renovated, were not to be included in the ratio studies. And with respect to with respect to income producing properties, that would be and apartments in particular, that would be apartments that were purchased with the intent to renovate, then renovated and had their starting income and expenses significantly changed, where the rents are significantly increased because of the renovated state of the property. The document that's referred to here, which I should have in my possession but don't, specifically states that...
Mr. Smith, we've heard the argument.
Okay.
That
Let's leave it at that then, I
there's
guess.
different categories to develop a cap rate.
Okay.
So that is fine. You don't have it with you, but
I do not have it with me today, but I
Okay.
certainly will next time.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'd just like to read something from that document as well. And what is also included in that IAAO document is that part of the requirements or for including a sale is sales are excluded only when they fail to meet the requirements of an open market arm's length transaction. And so I believe that the sales that we presented do represent that, and so they should be, they can be included according to the IAAO standards.
So, not having the document in front of me, I can't point out the specific clause that I'm referring to that refutes what was just stated there. But to that to that end, I do have rebuttal evidence regarding the capitalization rate presentation from the city.
Before we get into your rebuttal, okay, well, Mr. Hutchins, any questions?
Not at all, thank you.
Mr. Stenning?
Yeah. I want to just piggyback a bit on that. This cap rate, I'm looking at this chart.
You can hand that out.
I mean, we look at them a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
This 7.30, what kind of building would get that cap rate?
It would likely be a early 1900s building that is in the area of Selkirk and
I'm sorry, the area of where?
there's a market region near Selkirk and Salter. Like we have a market that we consider that area like a particular market region. So it would likely like a cap rate of our highest cap rate would likely be found there in an older building in that area.
Would you consider this a good location?
I would consider it a less desirable location.
To your knowledge, has this place, I mean, the only pictures I'm seeing and jumping ahead is with the appellant's pictures. Have anybody visited that property to see what it's like in terms of repair, etc.?
No, we have not inspected the property.
To your knowledge, has there been any major repairs done to that since 1967?
There were a lot of permits that were taken out, I think, in the 2011 timeframe for upgrading items such as windows and roofs and mechanical and heating and interior renovations, according to some of the notes.
You're going to have to speak up a bit for me, but and are any of those major amounts of money?
I don't have dollar figures, but if the renovations included windows, roofs, mechanical, and interior renovations, I would assume that it would be reasonably significant. But I don't have any dollar figures.
But I mean, if you take out a permit, you do get a dollar value.
Yeah, typically sometimes they do and sometimes they don't include construction costs and values. But in this particular case, I don't have those permits. All I have are the notes from our internal notes for the property.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, your presentation is based on a model for
Yes.
the subject property?
Yes.
Okay. So the standard parameters for the model and the subject?
Yeah, I would say there are model parameters, but they do reflect something that is in the lower end of the range in terms of market, because market rents are over $1,000 and the model rents are at about $800. So it is reflecting that.
You had mentioned that the subject is not really in a desirable neighborhood.
It is in a market region where we've noticed that the cap rates are higher, and so that would lead me to think that it is in an area that requires it. And we do reflect that.
So when you cranked out a price per suite, it's on the low side, and I think you had mentioned that.
Yeah. When you look at the values per suites, it's or per area, it's on the low end of the range, and I think that's reflecting the location and the condition of the property.
And you don't have a category for 4 bedrooms?
No, we just have another category.
Okay. Mr. Smith, you have rebuttal information?
I did. If Mr. Hutchings has any questions.
I'm sorry. He had mentioned that he
I have no
have
questions.
any.
Okay. Certainly.
So I thought that. Okay. Mr. Smith, you rebuttal information?
Yes, so just in reference to the multifamily sale comparables that are shown on page number 6 that the city has presented here. So again, what we're trying to show here is whether these should be included in the model or not in the first place. So looking at the first property there, 191 Roche, this property, if you look at the text that we have here, number 16 on that first page for 191 Roche, did you or did you intend to make major repairs or renovations to the property? Yes. Suite upgrades, $100,000. So the intent upon purchase by the purchaser was to renovate the suites themselves, and that's where you get your increase in rent, not necessarily from a new roof or windows or things of that nature. It's the renovations to the units. So clearly they purchased this property with the intent to change the return to themselves. The IAAO document that we're referring to earlier specifically excludes properties that were purchased with the intent to renovate and then renovated. So that is the first property, should not be included. 394 Talbot, the second one. If you look at the few following pages, you can see evidence of the low market rents to start with, and then subsequently higher market rents following that. 394 Talbot. We have publicly available information here also that the property was purchased with the intent to renovate. And if you look at the original rental rates for that property, $537 to $653 a month, then changing to $800 to $900 a month, it's clear that the property was renovated and significantly changed. So that one would be excluded as well. And then we have 285 Maxwell. Again, publicly available information here. This particular property, kitchen and bathrooms, the main points were significantly renovated. It was bought with the intent to renovate, and they are increasing their rents over a 3-year period of time. So that particular property would be excluded as well. The final property, 333 Ward, I am not going to get into. We've talked about this ad nauseum. I have spoken directly with the owners, who are sophisticated investors, and they bought it based on a 5.44% capitalization rate. And that's my rebuttal. I'm happy to answer questions.
Mr. Wong?
So on your page 12,
Yeah.
it says that the owner indicated that it purchased it at a 5% cap rate.
That is what it states, yes. Now,
And we've estimated to be at 4.84. I'd say that's pretty close, wouldn't you?
again, that's based on the in-place the in-place revenue, which is not what it was purchased for, which is why it's excluded from being included in any city model, or should be.
Are you aware that the municipal board has stated that an intention to renovate a property doesn't disqualify the sale for cap rate purposes?
There's many decisions from the municipal board. I'm not sure that we're looking at any specific ones here today, and I'm not sure which decision you're referring to. I know that there's others that also counteract that. Obviously, the appraisal theory and assessment as well supports what I'm conveying here today. So is this presented in the materials today, or is this new information?
Well, no, but you haven't presented the IAAO document either.
I know,
So,
because it wasn't in my brief anyway. Fair enough. If we're presenting new things, I have a few others.
I'm not going to present new things. I'm just going to say that there are several orders indicating that intention to renovate doesn't disqualify a sale from for cap rate purposes, and we don't know what owners are going to do with properties in terms of when we look at a sale. We just don't know. I mean, they can think one thing and do one thing, and we just don't know what they're going to do. What we do know is that what it sold for and what the operating income was, and I feel that's a reasonable way to try to establish the cap rates. And for us, in the end, do the cap rates yield an accurate indication of value? And when I look at the cap rates that we have, I believe it does yield accurate indications of value. So I think that's what it boils down to, and I guess that would be everything I have to say with regards to that, or any questions about your rebuttal.
Okay. If I can respond to that.
Sure.
So the contention is that the city doesn't know what a purchaser is going to do with the property upon purchase, and that's fair. They may not know, but 2 points. One, they receive the sale documents in many cases, and in cases where it specifically states that their intent is to renovate the property by their own IAAO standards, which I cannot present to you today. Those properties should be removed from consideration. Beyond that, there's only a certain number of sales that occur in the city. We follow up on sales that occur to see what has happened to the property post sale time for our capitalization rates that we present. I'm sure that the city has the the ability to do so as well, and should be able to identify properties that have been significantly renovated following purchase and make the adjustments to their model by removing those from consideration. So to say that that the 4 properties presented are a good indication of the accuracy of the model. I think it specifically points out that it's a good indication of the inaccuracy of the model if properties such as this are included. And if we look at the cap rate developed for the final property, material presented on it a number of times, further investigation not done, and the cap rate being considerably different, I think it does point out the inaccuracy of the cap rate model. And that's all I have to say.
Mr. Stenning?
No, I have nothing.
Okay, Mr. Hutchins?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah. Just, this is an ongoing, Mr. Smith, in regards to, so I don't know, you'd almost have to have 2 cap rates that are, applicable to, subjects.
To a particular sale.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we can argue about
I don't
this,
wanna consume a lot of time
and
here.
it can go and go.
right.
Okay.
The point being that they don't buy the property based on what it's generating at the time of sale, and that's why it should be excluded.
I mean, you can argue and say, well, it's market value, that they're buying. I mean, they can state that they're renovating, but they don't have to. Or do you put a dollar figure on it?
A dollar figure on the...
On the renovations and deduct that from the sale price? I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thought, certainly. I guess my final point would be we're on a 2-year assessment cycle, so properties that are renovated will then be caught in the
getting
next...
pretty close to
Right.
being pretty refined for a cap rate, on the 2-year cycle prior to a 4-year cycle.
Oh, it's certainly better than the 4-year, no
Yeah.
question. My point is that when an investor buys a property, they don't wait a year and then renovate. They buy it, renovate right away, and by year 2, generally
Yeah.
they'll be generating the revenue that
Yeah.
they anticipated when they bought it. So that additional value would then be caught in the following assessment cycle.
Okay. We're ready for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So 100 Charles Walk. If you look at my page number 3, there's a bit of information on it. We have a total of 304 units here. Property built in 1967, and there's a slight typo here. The property is actually, or rather the land is actually owned by Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and the lessee is Manitoba Housing and Renewal Corporation as it stands. So they don't control the land upon which the development sits. They obviously have a long-term lease on it, but they do not have the full parcel of rights, bundle of rights, and they don't have the ability to sell the property without the involvement, obviously, of the owner of the land itself. Moving on, we have some photos of the exteriors and interiors. There has been some degree of renovation done. They did windows, and they had a significant roofing issue that had to be taken care of. The general units themselves are fairly worn. I know that we have a picture of a kitchen there that looks newer than 1967, but for the most part, they're not all brand new like this. There is certainly a mix. Most of them tend towards the older. And you can get a sense of what the interiors are like. Generally worn finishes, etc. The site itself is shown on page number 8. Significant in size. Obviously, we have a total of 11 acres here. So obviously, that's a lot of systems to maintain, a lot of roof to replace, a lot of windows, a lot of hot water heaters, etc. Right? So your costs are going to be higher. As shown by the city in their statement. Looking at the location itself on page number 9, I've presented a kind of a chart here. Properties located in that Lord Selkirk Park area. Between Selkirk on the north, the CPR main line to the south, Main Street to the east, and Salter to the west. So this is essentially as challenged a neighborhood as I can think of in the city of Winnipeg in a socioeconomic sense. There's a reason that Manitoba Housing built their property here to provide their services to low-income people. They're at the heart of where this particular service is needed. You're not finding other developers building properties in this area. Generally, things will be considerably older. So just to speak to that area itself, obviously there's history of violent incidents, crime, police involvement. If we look at the Canada Census stats, comparing Winnipeg to Lord Selkirk Park, let's look at average household income. Just under $90,000 for Winnipeg, CMA, just under $30,000 for Lord Selkirk Park area, so roughly a third. We can go through the details there if you wish. Unemployment, 6.3% in Winnipeg, CMA, 23% in the Lord Selkirk Park area. Occupied dwellings, we have 67% being owned in the Winnipeg CMA, 9% being owned in the Lord Selkirk area, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm presenting there essentially is that we're in a particularly challenged neighborhood. That's where this property is located. What does that drive as far as investor interest, rents, et cetera, et cetera? So we can move on from there into the valuation itself. I did review the City of Winnipeg's modeling as far as the projection of income, vacancy, expense, etc. We were in agreement with regard to the rent that would be achievable on the property. The vacancy rate is fair. I did a 3-year history of the expenses for the property on my page number 13. You can see the result of that as far as stabilization goes. Comes out to $1,816,000. That's with a few minor changes. It's in the neighborhood of what the city was projecting with regard to the expense allowance. So in this particular case, we felt that it would be best to defer to the city's expense allowance in the interest of a fair value overall. And so our net operating incomes are in agreement with the City of Winnipeg. We don't have any dispute in that regard. Moving on to capitalization rate. You've all heard my... Mr. Merritt? You've all heard my discussions regarding social housing. Do I need to repeat them again today? Are we good there? Okay.
Nope.
Let's move beyond that then. We do present our capitalization rate study itself on page number 14. These are properties that were purchased for the in-place income and expense, net operating income. They had been either renovated or had no potential for immediate renovation and change of the return to the investor. So they were actually buying the in-place net income. And we have a range of 5.44% on the low end for the most recent development, 2006, 333 Ward, sold in 2016, up to a high of 6.65% for the 28-unit property on Balmoral, trading in 2018, built in 1972. So what we're looking at here is a range in that 5.5 to 6.5% range in general, with a cluster kind of in and around 6% itself. The major market participants as far as commercial brokerages are shown on my page numbers 15 and 16. Essentially what these charts are showing is that we're not seeing any compression in capitalization rate between the two cycles, between the 2016 year and the 2018 year. We're looking at Colliers indicating that they have low rises in Winnipeg between 5.25% to 6% in 16 and 5 to 6% in the 2018 year. C.B. Richard Ellis stating 5.5% to 6%, 5.75 to 6% in both the 16 and 18 years. So really a flat line. And if you look at the bottom corner of page number 16, this is another C.B. Richard Ellis chart giving you historical Winnipeg cap rates for the different property categories. You can see the dark green line at the bottom being multifamily, high-rise B, which is, I guess, the dominant one that they were looking at. You're looking at a flat line as far as cap rates go there between the 2013 and 2018 years, essentially. So we're really not seeing compression in capitalization rates over that time frame. So looking at the property itself, we are in, as I said, certainly what I believe to be perhaps the most challenged area in the city of Winnipeg. We have a social housing property. We have a property that has a high degree of larger number of bedrooms, units, so 3, 4, and 5, which are certainly lesser in lower demand in the marketplace. And dominantly, we have an area that is not going to drive a high degree of investor interest in either purchasing or reinvestment in properties in this neighborhood. So we have capped the NOI at a rate of 6.75%. This gives us a final market value of $16,168,000. The addendum materials include the income and expense. I have included a couple of board revision orders, which are essentially showing you the baseline capitalization rate, 5.5% being applied to investment grade properties such as Summerland at 77 University Crescent, 1750 Pembina Highway, another significant investment grade property, 990 Markham, the same thing. And finally, the last property there, 130 Tuxedo, is another Manitoba housing property. That property was decided at 6% cap rate, again, 130 Tuxedo. I did manage to reach agreement with the city at 6.5% on the Gilbert Park Manitoba housing facility. I think I'll leave it there. If you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Wong, questions?
It's on your page 18. It's for the, for our assessment, our income workup, like the income is tied to the expenses, is tied to the cap rate. Basically, if you change one part of that equation, you kind of have to make adjustments in other parts of the equation.
I don't follow you.
Well, if you use a certain income and expenses to get an NOI, and then you use a certain cap rate, say you apply to the sale. If you change the NOI, say if you increase the NOI, then the cap rate goes up. If you decrease the NOI, the cap rate goes down. So this is what I mean, that they're tied together, right?
I see what you're saying,
Yeah.
and you're talking not you're talking about sale transactions is what you're talking about.
I'm talking about like methodology. I'm talking about our valuation is a complete valuation, and it is tied together. And if you change one part of our equation, you have to make adjustments in other parts. In your particular evaluation, you've used the assessment department's income and vacancy and expenses, but you've changed the cap rate.
We're in agreement with the net operating income as it's derived after having looked at it. We're not making particular choices. So I'm sorry, are you saying that the net operating income?
Well, you're agreeing with our part of it. It's tied to a 6% cap rate. And so if you use a 6.7% cap rate,
why would the capitalization rate that you apply change based on the net operating income?
if you look at a sale and you adjust the cap rate, it affects the NOI. What I'm trying to say is, like, for your workup, you're using the assessment department's NOI, but the thing is that NOI only works with our capitalization rate. Do you think it's appropriate to use, I guess, part of someone else's valuation, and then that you don't dispute, and then use your own part of the valuation, the cap rate, which you do dispute? Do you think that's appropriate for valuation?
Well, 2 points. So I'm in agreement with and I did state this as we went through, I'm in agreement with the income, the vacancy, and I did check the expenses. So having checked it, I was in agreement with the net operating income. That doesn't tie to a particular cap rate. The cap rate is based on investor knowledge, investor sentiment, the strength of the income for the property, any number of things that drive cap rate. So it's.
So you do think it's appropriate?
You're saying that the income. Are you suggesting that the income that the city is projecting is too low, therefore the cap rate is lower as well to drive a fair value? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, my question is, do you think it's appropriate to use part of somebody else's valuation along with that you agree with, and then a different part which you don't agree with?
Absolutely. Having checked it against market, I feel that is fair, as long as one determines that it's fair representation of market value for that particular component. Then why would I not be able to use that if I'm in agreement?
Yeah. Okay, so you think it's appropriate? Okay.
In this particular case, yes.
Okay.
And
That would be all my questions.
Let me just add, I'm far from the only one that feels that way and has done the same checks and balances in using some of the city's information as well.
Thank you. Mr. Stennings, any questions?
don't know who I'm asking this question of, but this is a low-income housing.
Correct.
And these people that go in there, they have to pass a kind of means test, is that correct?
That's correct.
So I'm trying to get into the conversation about the cap rate being relevant to a sale. But an entrepreneur wouldn't buy the property based on low-income housing, would they? Well, they may, too, but am I on the wrong track?
No. So you're, yeah, and I'm assuming you're asking me because
I'm between you because you were both battling on that
time
kind
frame.
of subject. Yeah.
So on that note, yes, you have a public housing facility here in a tough neighborhood on rent geared to income, and that's what it is. So if an investor were to buy that, highly unlikely to start with, but if they were theoretically to buy it, they would be looking at that property as an investment and what can it become. So to that end, they're saddled with or encumbered with the current structure of that property with the residents in place going forward under tenancies branch. They have the rights to remain under their existing framework for a period of time. You would have significant public input and backlash on purchasing something of that nature to convert to rental housing, etc. All of these things would drive what you would be willing to pay for a property, and of course would drive the cap rate as well, which is why we're where we're at.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Smith, my first question is value of renovations. Any idea what's been spent in the last 10 years? I know that both of you referred to some upgrades done in the building.
There
project.
has been investment in the property, but I do not have a figure for you with regard to what
Okay.
has been spent on it.
So
but
the-
they have done, roofing was necessary, windows were ancient and required some investment, etc.
Okay. Is there a pending muni board on this property?
I am not aware if there was, as I did not represent the client in the last cycle.
No. There isn't, Mr. Long. Thank you.
I do have the result from the last cycle, though. It was reduced to $15,579,000.
Okay, so your page 18 is showing $17,526,000?
Yeah, that was the starting point, and it was reduced to $15,579.
15,579, okay. Okay, that was for 2018?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And my last question is, in your workup on page 18, you've accepted the city's expense allowance, yet your actual is about $34,000 more, and I figure out capped at 6.75 equals about $500,000 short if you use the actual.
Yes, well,
It adjusted the NOI upwards by about
yes.
$500,000.
So it's a delicate thing, right? We are using the 3-year history of the actual expenses and then stabilizing it, right? They don't assign a property management fee internally at Manitoba Housing, so we've done so at 5%.
Yeah.
Estimate of professional fees for a property of this size, probably on the accurate side. So they might be slightly higher, but it was within range of the city's value,
Okay.
so we felt it was appropriate to use that.
Okay. So you took the lower amount compared to the stabilized amount.
We took the lower expenses, yes. The city's was lower than where we were at, yes.
Okay. All right. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, just one question.
Yes.
The premium that you've added to the property because of its location? Did you add anything?
It certainly did, yeah. It's not a specific, it's not a calculation as such, right? It's an interpretation. So we felt that it would be of a similar nature of Gilbert Park, and we were again able to reach agreement with the city at a 6.5% cap rate on the Gilbert Park Manitoba housing facility. To my interpretation, this particular area would be somewhat more challenged than Gilbert Park, so we applied an additional 0.25% beyond that.
Okay. Either party want submission?
I guess before, I would like a summation, but before we go there, was the classification application made for this property? It appears to have been.
I believe when they made their applications prior to my involvement, they, in a excess of caution, they checked everything. So we're not disputing the classification.
Okay.
Summary?
I guess this is, from what I can tell, I don't believe it's accurate to use part of somebody else's valuation and part of your own valuation to try to estimate the market value. The income and expenses that we've used, they're tied together, and so you can't. I don't think it's the best thing to take part of it and then to say that everything's all right on one part and then not accept the last part of it, which is the cap rate. For our valuation for this property, we use parameters for the low end of the range for a market type property, and so we've reflected the location and the quality of the building in the assessed value, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $18,189,000.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
So just to that end, the suggestion, the implied suggestion is that we're selectively making use of the city's valuation, which is not accurate. What we've done here is look at the property itself versus market. Obviously, it is at the low end of the range as far as rent goes. Expenses are going to be higher. We've shown this against market, so we're not choosing to go with a portion of the city's valuation simply to benefit our case. The capitalization rate being tied to the rental amounts and the expenses is one doesn't drive the other. You're looking at the property, the property as it sits, where it sits, the strength of that property, and investor sentiment for what will drive that. So to suggest that a cap rate of 6% would be appropriate for this area is just not correct. So that's my summary. Thank you.
I thank you. I think we'll have to pick the pace up a little bit, but it's good to delve with great detail for the first. So we'll go on to the next property, which is 18 Inkster Garden Drive. So Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready.
The subject property is 18 Inkster Garden Drive. The roll number is 140-980-80000. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It is built in 1986, and it has 40 suites with 60 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $983 to get a potential income of $471,000. We used a 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $457,000. And we used a 46% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $244,000. Capped at 5%, we have an estimated market value of $4,896,000. It's $122,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents that we've used are a little bit below what in the low end of the range for market. And on the bottom of page 4 are some comparable expense, some expense comparables, showing that what we've used is in line. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. Page 6 are some cap rate sales. The sale of 333 Ward is probably similar in construction, just on a smaller scale. And that one's at 5%. On page 8 is a picture of the subject property. This property is owned by Manitoba Housing, so it is affordable housing, and using the affordable housing financials would likely yield inaccurate values, so we've resorted to the market. On page 12 are the CMHC rents, indicating that the 2-bedroom rents and 3-bedroom rents for the West Kelowna area are $1,053 and $1,202, whereas we've used $983. I believe the rents and the expenses are supported by market, and the cap rate is also supported by market. At $122K, $22,000 a unit, that's on the low end of the range, considering like 333 Ward sold for $174,000 a unit. So we've reflected this property as being lower in the range for market value, and asked they maintain the value at $4,896,000.
Is that it? Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions?
Yes, just briefly, the city's assessment is based on the income valuation model, correct?
Yes.
And the value derived here is model driven?
Yes.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Stenning.
I guess the only question I have is, the cap rate is 5% here, which would be a premium, assumably, right?
Yep. Like
Does the date of building have any bearing? I know it does, but what particular year it was built and when the cap rate changes?
Yeah, this one would be about 1975 and newer. So this building is built in 1986, so it kind of falls under the newer category. And for the newer category buildings, we are at 5%, and just like the 333 Ward is at 5%, so it's in the same category.
No, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
I have no questions, thank you.
Just one question, Mr. Wong. 3% vacancy rate, that's just kicked out by the model?
Yes, it's the vacancy that we've estimated based off of the income and expense information that we collect.
And the percentage expense rate model again?
Yes, I believe so.
So, and The 5% is applicable because of the age?
Yes, the age and location.
Okay. Mr. Smith, we're ready for your presentation.
Okay, so 18 Inkster Garden Drive. Again, we're dealing with Manitoba housing property here. Built in 1986, it is an apartment-style project of 2 and 3 bedroom units, 40 units in total, and it is obviously based on the same model as far as revenue generation for all Manitoba housing. It's rent geared to income, so there is no income to rely on in determining value for these properties. So we have some photographs of the property beginning on page number 4. You can see some internals there. Yes, the property was built in 1986. It is, it's not built as a market apartment in 86. It's built as a Manitoba housing project in 86. So the finishes tend to be of a lower level, sturdier, etc. They are representative of what they need to supply to their particular cohort of the market. So you tend to have smaller units, lower end finishes that may last longer if taken care of. Now, you can see from some of the photos here just some of the level of care of the interior of the units. Obviously, they tend to have more wear and tear in many of these Manitoba housing and social housing properties than a standard market apartment in a similar location. So that's what we're showing as far as the evidence there. Moving into the value itself, you can see the site on my page number 8 and location on page number 9. So it is on Inkster Garden Drive, to the northwest of that Inkster Industrial Park area. So moving into the valuation itself, it is social housing. It is Manitoba housing. We did look at the market evidence with regard to the CMHC statistics regarding 2 and 3 bedroom units. There were a couple here that were townhome as well, I believe. Having looked at the statistics versus the subject itself, and in taking into account where it's located as well, we felt that the rent applied by the city was appropriate. So we were in agreement with that. We've applied a 2.5% vacancy based on the CMHC stats as shown on page number 13. The expense allowance we've shown at the bottom of page number 13. We, of course, run through a 3-year history of the property and go through a stabilization process for the valuation year to arrive at our expense allowance. In this case, it comes to $239,569,000. That takes into account a property management fee of $23,000, which is roughly the difference between the city's expense amount and ours. Now, the operation of the building itself is not going to be significantly different between a market owner and Manitoba housing. The property needs to be heated, they need to have water, it needs to be cleaned, etc., garbage taken away. So the expenses are what they are. They're not certainly not on the high side, including the repair and maintenance not being on the high side. So we've used our expense allowance and this generates a net operating income of $220,569. I have not run through my discussion of the impact and complications of social housing. I will trust you gentlemen that that's all taken into account to start with.
It has been, Mr. Smith.
Our capitalization rate detail remains the same as in the prior property. So with regard to the subject property, we're looking at a more standard apartment complex in that it's 2 and 3 bedrooms. Normally you're going to generally see 1 and 2 bedrooms, but 2 and 3 is not out of the realm. So it's more standard in that regard. It's newer in 1986. It's 40 units. So all of these things, combined are going to drive the cap rate down. So looking at 5.5% as essentially the baseline for investment grade properties in the city, we've applied a 5.75% cap rate to the subject, and this gives us our $3,836,000 valuation. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Wong, questions?
So why didn't you use their income?
Well, I think we've clarified that in that it's rent geared to income for Manitoba Housing. So obviously any rent that they generate is not going to be of a market level. So we can't rely upon the income that is paid by the low income residents.
So it's not market.
The rent paid by the residents is not market, correct?
Okay. But you feel that their expenses are market.
Well, and that's what I was getting at there, is the operation of the building itself, the expenses are, and this is where I find the city often goes wrong in relying upon an expense percentage, is that it costs a certain amount to operate the building, whether that be heating it, insuring it, having water available to it, plowing the snow, taking the garbage away, etc. These are all fairly standard things. So the expenses for a property, if they fit with the market as we check, then yes, they are applicable. So that's why we've used the expense allowance, the actual expenses.
That would be all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stenning.
And I have a few minutes, maybe Mr. Hutchins.
Okay, Mr. Hutchins.
I'm just looking.
I have no questions. I'm good, thank you.
I don't think I have any. So, Mr. Stenning, it's up to you.
Okay, kind of a minor question. This particular property, it may apply to the other one, but Manitoba Housing, did they build this specifically, or did they buy this and turn it into Manitoba Housing?
No, they built it
They
specifically.
built it specifically. You would say this is a higher grade property in a better location than the one we just looked at?
I would, yes. It's more recent, it's more conventional in that it's 2 and 3 bedrooms versus 3,
Yeah.
4, and 5.
Got balconies.
It's
It does make it a little newer, that's all. That's all I've got, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Either party wants submission? No?
No, thank
Good. Okay. 404 to Salisbury Avenue. Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready.
The subject property is 404 to Salisbury. The roll number is 140-930-85300. It's a residential apartment block that's 1 to 6 stories high. It was built in 1990 and it has 70 suites with 42 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $790 to get a potential income of $664,000. We use 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $646,000. And we used a 54% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $296,000. Capped at 5%, we have an estimated market value of $5,939,000. It's $84,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. On the bottom of page 4 are some expense comparables. The expense that we've used is in line with market or supported by market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 6 are some cap rate sales. Once again, 333 Ward is probably the most similar. On page 8 is a picture of the subject property. On page 9 are the income and expenses submitted by the owner. This is a nonprofit property. On page 10 are the CMHC market rents for the area. The rents for 1 bedroom in the area are about $900 and almost $1,100 for a 2 bedroom. And we've applied a rate of $790. The model rent and expenses that we've applied are supported by the market, and the cap rate is supported by the market. The assessed value is at the lower end of the range for market value, and I ask that you maintain the assessment at $5,939,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Smith, questions?
Yeah, just very briefly, page 6, at the bottom of the page there, you have 500 Portage Avenue.
Yes.
That's Colony Square, is it not? The apartment office tower complex across from the University of Winnipeg?
Correct.
So that would be a mix of significant office building as well as apartment?
Yeah, if you note on the bottom, it does indicate that it is a blended cap rate and it is about 20% commercial.
Yeah. The city's aware that there was significant renovations done by Timber Creek following purchase?
They had planned to significantly renovate the property over the next 10 years as well as...
Okay, those are all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Stenning?
No questions.
Mr. Smith, you have the floor, sir.
Okay, so 404 De Salaberry, we're looking at Columbus Centennial Seniors Cooperative Housing Limited as the lessee of this property. City of Winnipeg is actually the landowner. And the Columbus Centennial is the lessee of the property until the end of their term. So they don't control the land upon which they sit. If you look at my page number 3, you can see the assessment history of this property dating back to the 2010-11 cycle. Significant reductions over that time frame, representative of market value going forward. In the last cycle, it was reduced from just over $5.6 million to $5,120,000, and now we're back up to $5,939,000. So, looking at the property, there's 70 units, 41 beds, 32 beds. There are photographs of the property on the next number of pages there. The property was built in 1990 and has not been changed since that time. The units themselves are not overly large, and the finishes for them are fairly standard from that time frame. So you can see the kitchen and cabinetry and the flooring and the carpeting, etc., all remain original. Kitchens being very small. The description of the property itself on my page number 10. Pardon me. There is a significant amount of common area in this property as well that you wouldn't typically find in a market apartment. That being a meeting room, there is an office for the cooperative, there's a large multi-purpose room, laundry room, there is another office area that is just used, it's not actually used for hairdressing anymore, it's just used by the residents for an association or something of that nature. Each of the floors itself also has small laundry room, etc. The description with the units is shown on page number 9 there as well. You can again see the photographs of it if you wish. So moving forwards from there, the site description, page number 11, and this is a significant part actually on a go-forward basis. They are experiencing significant slippage of the riverbank, a lot of riverbank erosion happening, and each year it's getting continually closer to the structure itself. So if you look at the aerial on page 11, if you look at where that walkway is on the riverbank, it's only a couple of feet from where the bank itself is now. So the erosion is coming closer, and they're faced with having to do some stabilization going forward. There really isn't the money available to do this, but it is an upcoming cost that they will face. Moving on to the property location, page number 12. I didn't have access to updated statistics for comparison purposes, unfortunately. What I'm showing in my chart here on page number 12 is that the specific area that this property lies within is again of a more challenged nature socioeconomically. So you can see that average income is lower for households, value of owned dwellings obviously lower, government transfers higher, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the area that the property sits within. Obviously that has an impact on rents as well as desirability from an investment perspective. So moving on to page number 13. With respect to ownership, City of Winnipeg, again, is the owner of this property. They own the land. It is a leasehold interest that, not Willow Park, it is a leasehold interest that Columbus Centennial Seniors Co-op has until the end of their lease term. They do not have the right to transfer the property or sell the property outright without the agreement of the landowner itself. And obviously, approaching this as an investor, that would have an impact as far as purchase of the property itself. Ownership is shown at the bottom of page number 13. The lease itself runs through 2029, at which time the owner, City of Winnipeg, has the right to either take back the property as is, or B, have the Columbus Centennial remove the improvements. I'm not saying that's likely. It's simply what's contained in the lease document itself. So all of those things Together, you're looking at a time horizon up to 2029 if you were to purchase the property. Obviously, there's some kind of negotiation that would happen at that point. If you were to buy this as a private investor and the City of Winnipeg were to own the land, I would speculate that there would be some additional payment that would be required to purchase the land itself beyond just buying the improvements from Columbus. Moving on to valuation, looking at the property itself, you can see the actual income shown on page number 15 there. This is both the occupancy charges and the rent supplement assistance, as well as parking. If we look at the actual rental rates that they're charging $781. This is on page 16, $781 for 1 beds and $918 for 2 beds. Now, this produces a rent of $705,380. Now, is that reflective of market? Yes, it is reflective of market. We checked it against CMHC here. Pardon me. As well as against market comparables as shown on my chart on page 16. So we're at $705,380, slightly above the city's projection. We've included the parking income for the subject property as shown at the bottom of page number 17. And with regard to subsidy income, I go through a long detailed discussion of this on page 18 as to why it is not included as revenue, nor should it be. So the subsidy income is excluded from the valuation. We're looking at market value, and their rents are at a market level. Moving on to page 19, vacancy stats. We're using a 2.6% vacancy for the subject. The expense stabilization is shown at the bottom of page 19. We arrive at a stabilized amount of $387,880. This is a reduction from their actual expenses as we reduce their property management and administration down to a market norm of 5% of EGI. So this is summarized on page number 20, and we arrive at our net operating income of $310,219. Now, similarly to the Manitoba housing properties, we are looking at essentially social housing, affordable housing type of situation here. It is operated by an independent nonprofit, Columbus Centennial Seniors Housing Co-op, intended for low-income seniors, provides housing on that basis, and that has the impacts that I've discussed with you gentlemen in the past. The capitalization rate detail it remains the same on my pages 21 through 23. The subject property itself, again, they're looking at an upcoming expense with regard to river stabilization. We don't know what that number is. It's not going to be insignificant. That's not a major driver of the cap rate, but it would certainly have an impact on what one would pay for the property. Typically, I would be at a 6% cap rate for this property. In the last cycle, the decision of the Board of Revision was at a 5.75% capitalization rate. And in arriving at my value today, I have used a 5.75% capitalization rate. This brings us to our final market value of $5,395,000. Again, we're not seeing that compression in capitalization rates. If you look at my page 25 again, you can see that the city has lowered their cap rate from 5.25% to 5% for the subject property. There's been no changes to the property over that time frame, and we're closer to the end date of their lease with the city of Winnipeg. So that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, questions?
So I guess for your expenses, you're including replacement reserve expense?
That's correct. It's a requirement under their under their funding, and indeed in a market situation, the replacement reserve is essentially part of the profit that is taken by a market apartment owner.
Isn't the replacement reserve normally for capital items down the road? The
Replacement reserve is an amount that's required to be set aside for future expenses for the property. Yes,
typically capital.
Often capital,
Yeah.
And this is not, as I stated, this is not different from from a market owner in that their replacement reserve is taken out of their income for the property at the end.
That would be all my questions.
Mr. Hutchins?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Stenny?
Yes. Just want to go to, you're talking about the river property. River property generally is a bonus to have property on the river, generally speaking. So you're saying in the event of something, or the, what do you say, it's kind of degrading or whatever, if the river stabilization is a problem, that doesn't become an expense to the individual owner, which would be, that would be a city or provincial pay
No.
expense, wouldn't it?
No, not in this circumstance. All expenses regarding the property are the responsibility of Columbus Centennial, and that would include riverbank stabilization, etc.
You're saying to me that if the river came up and it was a hazard to houses on the river, that each individual person would be responsible?
No, not the flooding. That's entirely different. What I'm referring to is every year the riverbank itself gets carved away further and further, and is getting quite close to the property itself. So that is the responsibility of the of Columbus Centennial to prevent that, because obviously if it undermines the building, it will be damaged. Significant costs will ensue. With regard to,
Are you saying that possibility is affecting the cap rate?
I'm saying that there is an expense there that any purchaser would have to account for in buying.
But wouldn't
property.
you account for it when it happens? Not to, I mean, I don't want to belabor that, but if it happens, you deal with it. But
Well-
can you say, we assume that 10 years down the road it may be a problem?
It's been getting closer all the time. So let me give you an example. If I were to,
I'm okay. I
Okay.
live with property, so I know a lot
right,
about that.
I know.
So I'm just testing you to see that
It
could
does.
happen, but it may never.
Oh, it will happen at some point if it continues going. If they don't stabilize it, then it will undermine the property, and
But at
and
that
they will-
point, they will stabilize it.
they will have to stabilize it
Yeah,
before
which is
that,
fine. We all face that.
before that point.
That's all I have.
With regard to being on the river, they're facing the dirty, I don't know what that industry is on Point Douglas there, but that's what is across the river from them.
Mr. Smith, just one question. Current pictures or old pictures?
They are not fresh pictures, but it has not changed.
Okay. Submission, either party?
Nope.
No? No. Okay. We do one more and then have a break?
Okay.
Or is that okay? Or unless you want to have a break now?
Yeah.
Now?
Can we get coffee in this building?
I don't.
Maybe now is okay.
Yeah.
I think now is good.
What's that?
Now is good.
That was good?
It's just
good.
because we have one less property on the docket.
Yes, the bottom one?
Yeah, so
Yes.
I think we're kind of
Okay, we're okay. So let's take 5.
Is it possible to turn on?
I'm not used to getting coffee breaks. This is,
I don't even think it's a coffee break. It's more like a washroom break.
Yeah, you're right. The washrooms are around there. And I think
Okay.
Ready? Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order, and we'll deal with number 45, Stotacona. Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready.
Sorry, have to find something. The subject property is 45 Stadacona. The roll number is 140-927-71800. It's a residential multi-use property that is 11 stories high. It's built in 1986 and it has 124 suites with 41 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $828 for the apartment. To get a gross potential income of $1,232,000. We used a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $1,200,000. And we used a 54% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $550,000. After 5%, we have an estimated market value of $11,018,000 for the apartment and $532,000 for the commercial space, which is an exempt daycare. Page 4 is information on the commercial space. It's 2,261 square feet, and we have a rate of model rate of $14.90. On page 5 are our apartment rent comparables, showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. At the bottom of page 5 are some comparable expenses to show that the expenses that the model is estimated are in line with what's on the market. On page 6 are some commercial comparables that show that the $14.90 that we've used are supported by the market. Page 7 are information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 8 are some cap rate sales. It's going to be maybe the most comparable is 333 Ward. On page 10 is a picture of the subject property. Page 11 to 13 are the income and expenses submitted by the owner. The owner is Manitoba Housing and Renewal Corporation, so it is affordable housing and not representative of market. On page 14 are market rents from CMHC for the rents for one bedrooms are about $905, two bedrooms about $1,093, and three bedrooms for $1,404. We've used $828, so the rent that we've used is at the lower end of the range of market. So the rent and the expenses are supported by market, and the cap rate is supported by the market as well. The assessment at $88,000 a unit is on the lower end of the range for this type of building, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $11,550,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Smith?
Just to the 5% cap rate, that's towards the lower end of your cap rate scale, is it not? 20th to 80th percentile?
It's within the 4.9 to 5.3 range.
And it's the rent the rent used on the what's termed the commercial portion, 1490, that's model driven, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Stenning?
Oh, a little one. Your office and storage, you got a different cap rate on it. Why would you do that?
You're talking about the 5.7%?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the cap rate for office and storage space, whereas the other income stream is the cap rate for
Yeah, I get
apartment
that. But you
buildings.
wouldn't just meld it in because it's all in the same building?
I mean, you could calculate it, but we keep the commercial income separate from the apartment income, and because they have different rental rates and they have different cap rates.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Mr. Smith, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So 45 Stadacona Street. This is another Manitoba housing property run based on rent geared income. So again, we don't have a reliable income stream to base our value on, so we have to look at market. The property itself has a total of 124 units, 56 one-beds, 53 two-beds, and 15 three-bedroom units. It was built in 1986. We have some photographs of the property beginning on page number 4 through 9, I believe. So you can see the exterior of the tower itself on page number 4, as well as the smaller building. There are 2 buildings on site. The smaller building being the one at the bottom of the photo, page 4. You can see the interior of the units in the following pages and the condition of them. I think this is a good, quite a good example, actually. So this particular property was built in '86 by Manitoba Housing for low-income residents. It's built again in a somewhat tougher neighborhood that a typical developer wouldn't build in. If you look at my page 11, page 10, you can see the site itself, just at the corner of Stadacona and William Newton. But really, it's just over the bridge from Point Douglas and just north of that Nairn interchange there by 1 block. So it's that's the area that we're looking at. I didn't provide you with census stats, but suffice it to say it would be similar to the one that we showed you for 404 de Salaberry, except this is even more so. The finishes on the inside, obviously you can see the wear and tear. They are original. I've never seen flooring quite in this condition before. That's not a single unit. It's a number of them that we had visited, so it's not in the best condition. Moving on to the valuation itself. So looking at that property in the marketplace, what is that going to rent for? Well, it's going to rent for the low end of the scale. Looking at the rents the rent level that was applied by the city, we are in agreement with it for that reason. It's not a property that would generate greater rents than what is described there. Vacancy, we're at 2.6%. The chart is shown on page 14 and page number 14 as well. We were also in agreement with the expense allowance for the subject property. Capitalization rate. We've run through our discussion on this. Again, we're looking at a social housing property in a tougher socioeconomic neighborhood that comes along with many issues. You have the issues upon disposition. Investor interest certainly would drive cap rate for properties such as this. We've applied a cap rate of 6.5% based on all of these parameters to the subject property. And this gives us our value of $8,475,000 for the for the multifamily portion of the property. Again, we applied a 6.5% cap rate mutually to Gilbert Park. I'm applying 6.75% to the 100 Charles Walk. In this case, I'm at a 6.5% cap rate for this particular property. Moving on to what's termed the commercial portion. It is essentially a daycare for the building itself. I don't believe it's even rented out. So it would not achieve a rent of $15 on the open market. What we've provided you here are a couple of other daycare rents that are not on front streets, such as Henderson. So property on Colony, 276 Colony. They had a net rent equivalent of $10.85 a square foot for their daycare space. Victor Lewis, $8.67 a square foot. And then one on Regent, which actually is in a standard strip mall, well located. They had a $9.55 a square foot rental rate as of 2013 for 5 years. So we've applied a rate of $10 a square foot. I think this is probably generous. To that, we have our capitalization rates showing at the bottom of the page for retail. Would never cap at 5.7% in the market as a component of a social housing project in the location that it is. These are investment sales. We've applied a cap rate of 8% to the standard parameters as shown on page 20, including the 5% non-recoverable costs as well as the 2% structural, giving us our value of $238,000 for what's termed the commercial portion of the building. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
I have no questions.
Mr. Stenning?
Yeah, you're page 5 and 6, 7. You're showing apartments here that obviously need some kind of work being done to them.
Yep.
And they would appear only one may show that there's somebody in there. Do you know, do you take these pictures or
Yes.
you take them? But wouldn't they be in the process of being empty now and having them redone for somebody to come in?
We see both occupied and vacant suites as they're available. We try and see occupied ones and give the notice that's required. So I don't remember the specific units here, but a number of them were occupied, as you can see, with people's belongings in there. So yes,
Could be
there's
empty.
One of them was certainly vacant. The one with the kitchen where the doors are and the fridge is open.
I looked through the statement and I can't. Normally, you would be allowed to take a reserve have a built-up reserve for expenses. I don't see it on there, but I'm assuming that they would have a reserve.
Natural housing themselves.
Yeah.
Typically,
I
they
mean,
have a
it's
reserve in
legal
their,
to do that.
a replacement reserve.
Pardon?
A replacement reserve you're
Yeah,
referring to?
yeah.
Typically, they, I have seen it vary with them. In some cases, it's stated, and others it's not. It varies.
Yeah, all I'm getting at is these pictures may not really reflect very much because you've got a 54% expense, which is pretty high, not overly high, but it's reasonable. So you're kind of showing that the place is run down, but not necessarily true, is it?
No, it is run down. I've been through it this summer, and that is what it looks like. And that's not one single unit. It's a selection of the property. So that is what it looks like, and that is the condition that it's in. I'm very, very clear with housing that I don't want to see the unit that you've just fixed up, and I don't want to see the unit that's absolutely trashed. I want to see a representation of the building so that we're dealing with what the property is.
Okay,
overall.
that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, you said you were at the subject property.
Yes.
I've been through this building also.
Okay.
I don't know where the daycare is, and there's no shots of the daycare. So, but it's quite big. It's
Yes.
2261 square feet. So
I'm trying to-
I don't know exactly where it is.
Yeah.
They have a recreation room, a big room.
I believe.
Is that the daycare?
I think that's what they're referring to as the daycare space.
I did the advanced poll for seniors, and we sat up there.
I believe that's the space that
So
we're
that's
talking
what it is. Okay. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Who runs the daycare? And is there a lease in place or anything?
No, not that I know of.
Okay. Yeah, I can't find it on the
I
statement.
think this is a less formal.
Oh,
They have had a daycare running there. It's not always present.
okay.
I don't have the detail for you.
Okay, thank you.
Summation, either party?
I guess if I could present something to just rebut the 7%. I won't speak to it too much. I just like to present it so that it's, I guess, on record.
I don't see any 7% here. So
On the commercial portion,
it's 8.
it's on page 20 of the applicant's brief.
So the expense allowance?
Yeah, he has the expense
Expense.
allowance at 7%, and we have it at 2%. I'd just like to present something that shows that it's closer to 2%.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go to page 3.
You.
I was going to say that the city has the data that the city has is showing that the non-recoverable expenses is at about 2%, and if the applicant is using 7%. I'd just like to show that with some examples that the 2% that we are using is substantiated by what is in the marketplace, and that's pretty much it.
Mr. Smith, questions?
I will keep it as short as I can. This particular page is new to me, but I've seen a similar one.
The chart is the same.
It's extensive than it used to be. I didn't present my, given the size of the portion of the building that we're talking about here and the tax exempt nature, I didn't present The case regarding the non-recoverable expenses, suffice it to say, we Stevenson Advisors did a study of non-recoverable expenses over a 3-year period, looking at between 40 and 55 buildings per year, where we had full data on the properties, and I'm speaking from memory here, our expense ratio ranged from, I think it was 11.5 to 12.5, depending whether you included particular expense categories. To that end, there's been decisions that have come out. The province of Manitoba Assessment Department continues to use 5% non-recoverable, 2% structural in their valuation model, as do other assessment entities in Canada. So I don't think we need to go into it anymore.
Agreed. Mr. Hutchins, any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Steady, any questions?
No, I have no questions, thank you.
Okay. Did you want to summarize? No. Mr. Smith?
No, thank you.
Let's go on to Sun Valley Drive, number 1. Mr. Wong, please.
The subject is 1 Sun Valley Drive. The roll number is 040-031-87100. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It's built in 1985 and has 24 units with 24 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $998 to get a potential income of $287,000. We used a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $280,000. And we used an expense ratio of 50% to get a net operating income of $138,000. Kept at 5%, we have an estimated market value of $2,761,000, which is $115,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent and expense comparable, showing that the rents and expenses that we've used are in line with what's on the market, and showing that the rents might actually be a little bit on the low end of the range of market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 6 are some cap rate sales. Page 9 is the income and expenses submitted by the owner. The owner is Manitoba Housing, so I don't think the financials can be used to try to estimate market value. On page 12 are the rents from CMHC, indicating market rents to be for 2 bedrooms about $1,093 and for 3 bedrooms about $1,404. We applied a rate of $998, so we're at the lower end of the range of market. So the income and the expenses are supported by market, and I ask that you maintain the assessment at $2,761,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Smith?
I have no questions.
And Mr. Hutchins?
Well, we've got quite a range in estimate of value here, so. Sorry. No questions, thank you.
Mr. Stenning?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Okay. Your NOIs are exactly the same, so the city's at 5%, and Mr. Smith, you're at
5.5.
yeah.
5.5.
Why can't I? Hang on for 1 second here.
Sorry.
Yes. Okay. I got the. Okay. I knew I. Anyways, the floor is yours, Mr. Smith.
Okay, this, as stated, is a Manitoba Housing property. It's probably the most conventional of Manitoba Housing properties we'll look at. here today. One Sun Valley Drive, built in 1985, built for low-income families, essentially. That's why you see so many 3 bedrooms in it. It's a even split between 2 and 3 bedroom units, 12 of each for 24 total units. It's also operated on rent geared to income, so the income portion is not applicable in determining a market value for the property. You can see the pictures of the property externally and internally. This property has not been renovated since construction. It is in what I would call average condition, but it's of its vintage, and that's what you see in the photos. So pretty average property from that point of view. The location, as you can see, it is just off of Gateway in that East Kildonan area, just the corner of Sun Valley and Gateway itself. So moving on to the valuation, we did check the city's income and expense for the property. Felt the income was in line with what it would generate, as well as the vacancy, and the expenses were quite close to the subject itself. So we deferred to the city's expense allowance of $142,088. So we're at the same net operating income. Now, capitalization rate, probably the only Manitoba housing property that I've seen so far that I would cap at a 5.5% cap rate, but it's decently located, well constructed, in average condition. So I would apply a 5.5% cap rate to this particular property. And again, if you look at the addendum materials here, the Colliers and CBRE information aside, if you look at the cap rates applied by the board in this cycle to some pretty significant investment properties at Summerland on University Crescent, Markham, Pembina Highway at 5.5% cap rate. You're not going to drive a lower cap rate than that for the subject property. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Wong, questions?
No questions.
Mr. Hutchins?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Stenning? All right, let's go on to the next one, which is 718 Taché Avenue. So, Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready.
The subject property,
718 Taché.
718 Taché Avenue. The roll number is 060-610-86000. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It's built in 1979 and has 12 suites with 7 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $999 to get a potential income of $143,000. We used a 1.8% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $140,000, and we used a 46% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $75,000. Capped at 4.5%, we have an estimated market value of $1,675,000. It's $139,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent and expense comparables, showing that the rent and the expenses that we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 6 are some cap rate sales. On page 8 is a picture of the subject property. Page 9 are the income and expenses submitted by the owner, which is Manitoba Housing. page 11 are market rents from CMHC, indicating the 2-bedroom rents to be $1,088 and 3-bedroom rents to be $1,388. It's higher than what we've used at $996. The rents and expenses are supported by market, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $1,675,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Smith, questions?
Just two, I guess. So the rent comparables on page 4, they're generally lower than the rent that's applied to the property.
Yes.
And the cap rate of 4.5% for the subject property, that's well under the 4.9 of the 20th percentile, correct?
It is in the lowest 20th percentile, yes.
And that would be driven by
Age, location, and size.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
Just the location. Are we're north of Provencher on Taché, facing the river? Would that be correct? I believe.
Yeah, it's just off of the, like if you go over the
Provencher Bridge.
overpass, just hang a left.
Okay. So we're surrounded by all those new condos. I guess that's what I mean.
Yeah. There's a lot of newer developments around there.
Okay. That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stenning?
No, you just asked that question. Is this, where do I see the pic, where there's green? Is that, they have access to that land? That's on the riverside?
I believe it's actually park space.
It's park space. You don't know if it's their property, do you?
Oh, I'm pretty sure it's not their property. I'm pretty sure it's not their property.
I'm looking for the picture that I saw and I can't find it. Yeah, I was here.
Page
Oh, here,
8 or
yeah.
9.
8?
I mean, I don't know if
They're just within the red bounds.
yeah, that's right, but this is a road?
Yes.
Yeah, so they don't have, no, okay, that, I got confused with this one, okay, that's it. And, no, I won't ask that, so I'll pass.
Mr. Wong, you're using a cap rate of 4.5?
Yes.
Okay. And I noticed that it was built in 1979,
Yes.
so it's close to the border where the cap rates will change. I think
Yes.
it's 74?
Yeah, around there.
Okay.
74, 75.
So 74 would bring it to what?
It might be 4.9.
Okay, not 5?
I actually don't know, but I can tell you that if it was, if the cap rate was 5%, and the effective year built was say before 1974, it would be 5.3%. So I'm just using that as a bit of a guide.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Smith, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So 718 Taché again, Manitoba housing property. It is located north of Provencher. If you look at my page number 9, you can see the red dot where it is located. The site is located, site picture is located on page number 8, directly beside it there, so you can get an overview of what we're looking at. 12 units in total, 9 2-beds, 3 3-bedrooms. So again, designed for families, low-income families, to provide affordable housing to that segment of the population. Run on a rent-geared income basis. So again, we're not looking at the actual revenue generated by the property, as it's not appropriate to come up with a market value. So property was built in 1979, and you can see the photographs of it on pages 4 through 7, I guess it is. The interiors are have a bit of wear. There has been some renovation to a few units where required, as you can see from some of the photos there. Again, generally the finishes are going to be of a more durable nature, etc., for Manitoba housing properties. So, looking at the valuation for the property, the city's value of $997 for on average for these units is appropriate for the subject when we looked at the marketplace. So we're in agreement on the rent. It is well located, so we did not change the vacancy rate in this particular instance, although typically you'll see higher vacancies for 3-bedroom units in the marketplace. This being Manitoba housing, they're designed to accommodate families, so we went with 1.8%. Bottom of page 12, do we do our 3-year expense stabilization? You can see the actual expenses as shown there. The expenses, you can see the variation year to year. There was quite a wide variation in repair and maintenance. The 2017 value did not was kind of an extraordinary number. So we changed the R&M to $1,500 per unit, kind of a market standard. So we reduced the R&M to $18,000. We also included a property management amount of 5% of effective gross income. So this gives us our expense allowance of $73,995. If we were, having gone through that exercise, if we were closer to the expense allowance of the city, we would have deferred to it, but in this case it is significantly different. So our net operating income is $66,966. Capitalization rate, similarly to the last property, we have relatively low number of units, 12 units. It is well located. It's in average condition, given all of these factors, despite the fact that you would have issues on a sale of a property such as this. On disposition, we have applied a 5.5% capitalization rate. So this gives us our market value of $1,218,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, questions?
I was just wondering if, I guess, the rents for housing, do they typically include all the utilities?
Typically, they would include all the utilities, but again, they're on rent geared to income, so their rent that they pay is not useful in determining the revenue side of the equation for determining market value.
I'm just talking about the expense side of the equation, because like there are some market rents that include all utilities, but would it be safe to say that there are a lot of rents that don't include utilities?
I would say it's certainly a mixture in the marketplace. Yeah. It's not skewed one way or the other. If you're building a new property, certainly you would build it in such a manner that, if possible, the tenants would be paying for their hydro and heat, etc.
So, if would it be possible that these expenses could be a little bit lower if it was market and where the tenant paid some of the utilities?
They might be marginally lower, but again, they don't account for a number of expense categories in their expenses that they provide to us. That being the property management, and there's a number of other things that they are not diligent on tracking, such as professional fees or things of that nature.
That would be all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Stenning.
I have to ask this question, even though it may seem suspect. I just want to get it around my mind. The two expense rates that you have, the two separate ones, and you may have explained that, but why is that? Why are there two? You've got
That's the city's
46.52, and the city's different, you're 65. What are the difference in these expenses?
Well, the city's, I'm assuming you're asking me, so the city's
Well, I
valuation is
decide. I mean,
the expense allowance.
it's just, you don't mind me asking?
No, questions of Mr. Smith.
Yeah, okay.
So theirs would be model-driven based on the information that they collect and what the model spits out. And we run through the actual expenses for the property and do a stabilization of them, as you can see on page number 12 there. So these are the actual expenses year by year. Page 12.
I got that. No, I got it right there.
Okay. So you've got 15 through 17. And then we look at stabilizing that for the valuation date
Oh, I see, okay.
in the furthest column with comments on the right-hand side as to how we did that. So that's your difference there. Manitoba Housing doesn't account for any property management in their expenses.
Okay.
So we have to apply a normalized amount for that and then make
Okay.
any reductions or changes that are required to stabilize it.
Okay, that's fine. Thank
Okay.
you.
Summary of the party?
Could I ask?
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the main difference is the 5% management fee. It's $7,000
On
in the expenses,
side,
expense line.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, it's my only question.
Summary of the party?
No.
Okay, let's go to the last one on the docket. So, Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready.
The subject property is it 429 Rashad? The one that was withdrawn was 424 Allno, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, the subject property is 429 Rashad Street. It's the roll number is 060-706-70000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It was built in 1967 and it's 18 suites with 16 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. Or actually, before I go there, on page 2, there's a sale for the subject on July 2016 for $1,548,000. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $785 to get a potential income of $169,000. We use a 1.8% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $166,000. We use a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $84,000, capped at 4.9%. We have an estimated market value of $1,723,000, which is $95,000 per unit. On page 4, our rent comparable showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 6 are some cap rate sales. On page 8 is a picture of the subject property with a little bit of information on it. On page 9 are the income and expenses submitted by the owner. On the last page is their balance sheet. On the account number 1603, which is the current assets for land and building. They have it listed at $1,801,000. I believe that supports the assessed value of $1,723,000, and the 2016 sale is a little bit lower, but if you adjust that upwards to the April 1st, 2018 reference date, it would be supportive of the assessment at $1,723,000. So I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $1,723,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Smith, questions?
Yes, just bear with me for just a moment. So, your last page of your brief there states 429 Reshow balance sheet. Where is this from? This is, and I'm looking at the income and expense information that was submitted by the client to the city of Winnipeg. So I know that this is not contained within that information. So where did this information come from?
It was submitted by the owner or the property manager.
Not in the information that's available that was provided to the city, or at least any information that is available to them. When information is submitted to the city, it's scanned and available online to the owner or their agent, correct? All of the information that's submitted?
I'm not sure what's available to the agents. All I know is that this is the information that we have.
Okay. This is highly unusual, certainly, that a page such as this would be submitted, and I don't believe that this particular owner would be generally providing things of that nature. So, are you aware of the background with regard to the accounting for this property, or how this was derived, or what it's based on, whether it's the renovated state of the property, future income? Do you know what's involved in these numbers?
This is their balance sheet.
Okay. That's really my only question. Thank you.
Mr. Stein.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hutchins.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Nope, I'm fine. Minus.
Mr. Wong, any idea on the cap rate at the time of sale in 2016?
No.
No. Okay. Thank you.
I guess, Mr. Wong, he complied in regards to the questionnaire, just, I think, the previous cycle, eh? The questionnaire was completed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they
And
would they just.
so could you not have figured out the cap rate?
It would be a very rough estimate. Would be about 5.1%.
Okay.
Yeah, there was this was the.
This is an older building, Mr. Wong. It was built in 1967.
Yep.
So then you're at close to the 5%.
Yeah, we're at 4.9%, and I said if you look at their sale against the known information that we have, it seems to be approximately 5.1%.
Okay. Mr. Smith, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So 429 Reshow, this is a market apartment building, as noted, purchased in 2016 for $1,548,000. The main issue that we're going to be dealing with here today is income. Pardon me. The property built in 1967, 6 one-bedroom units, 12 two-beds for a total of 18 units. It has been renovated, at least the suites themselves have been renovated to a degree, in that this particular developer will redo some flooring, kitchens to a degree, and bathrooms, and change the revenue model of the property. So that was what their purchase was based on. Looking at page number 7, you can see description of the property. There's photos of it prior to that. And the site and location are shown on page numbers 8 and 9. So it's in that central St. Boniface area. Certainly well located. Now, moving on to the income portion. If you look at my page number 11, you can see where we have an issue here. The property was purchased in 2016, renovated, and the rents were then increased. There was a claim or a dispute, or whatever the correct terminology is, with Residential Tenancies Branch, and the property owners were required to reset their rents back to what they were prior to the renovation time frame. And that is shown on page number 11 on the right-hand column. So at the end of 2017, your rents were as set in the left-hand column. As of the valuation date, they would be the same as they are in the right-hand column there. So instead of getting $158,256, they would be generating $136,032 with rents in that $600 plus dollar range. Page number 12 gives you a bit of data with regard to this. Again, Residential Tenancies rolled back their rents lower than that of 2017. So that's what the rents were. They are not able to change that. That is, of course, governed by residential tenancies, and so their revenue is capped at that amount for that time frame. To this, we've added the parking revenue, as well as projected laundry revenue, as shown on page number 12. We deferred to the 1.8% vacancy for this particular property, given the renovated state of it and where it's located. Actual expenses for the property came to $78,373, slightly under the city's expense allowance, and we have used those in our value. So we come to net operating income on page 14 of $58,981. So actual rent, market vacancy of 1.8%. We've added the parking and laundry, prospective laundry, and the expenses were somewhat lower, and we've used those in our value. So looking at the property, yes, it has had it certainly had a setback with regard to residential tenancies. I don't know precisely what the way forward there is to recapture their renovation costs. Certainly it would take some time, but the property is well located. It has been renovated. We've applied 5.25% capitalization rate based on it being renovated, location, etc. So this gives us our final market value of $1,123,000. Now, the purchase price again would have reflected the opportunity, essentially, of the purchaser to change the revenue significantly for the property, as shown with the discrepancy between the two revenue years, as shown on my page 11. So while they paid more for it, they were buying a different revenue stream, essentially. So our final market value is $1,123,000.
Good, thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Wong, questions?
No questions.
Mr. Hutchings?
Just out of curiosity, so they didn't spend enough to get out of the rent controls? Is that how it works? Or?
I didn't get enough detail from them as to why they did not
Frozen.
qualify, but
Yeah.
it was it was, they were forced to roll it back entirely, like the entire building, not on a suite by suite basis. So it wasn't a single, it was a broad scale, you must rewind.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stenning?
I have no questions.
Summation, either party?
Sure. It just sort of seems like the model has been a reasonably accurate estimate of the value in this case, and I ask that you maintain the assessment at $1,723,000.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
I would just state that an astute investor would make their purchase based on the actual net income produced by the property.
All right. I think that concludes everything on the docket. So, gentlemen, thank you very kindly. Thank you. Mr. Wong, have a pleasant day. Mr. Smith, same thing.
Thank you.
Katie?
Yep.
Please.
Do we have a hockey game tonight?
Every